having gone through 5 seasons and now moving towards season 6. The Chosen has touched millions of hearts, bringing tears to many viewers and helping countless people rediscover or deepen their faith in Jesus. Yet it's fair to say that not everyone has watched every season from beginning to end, and many may not fully grasp the deeper meaning this series is trying to communicate. Today, I want to summarize the most important messages, moments, and turning points from season 1 through season 6. This overview is meant to give a clear, complete picture of the story as a whole, helping us understand Jesus more clearly and recognize what the Chosen ultimately wants to convey to all of us. Let's begin. Season 1, the beginning of the journey. Season 1 of The Chosen opens in Judea, a land under Roman occupation where daily life is marked by fear, hardship, and religious pressure. Ordinary people struggle to survive, weighed down by taxes, social division, and the feeling that God has been silent for a long time. Faith exists, but for many it feels distant and unreachable. The story first centers on Mary Magdalene, a woman living on the margins of society. She is shown suffering deeply, tormented by darkness and trauma, isolated from others, and unable to escape the grip of her past. Those around her fear her and avoid her. Mary's life feels hopeless, as if she has been forgotten by both people and God. When Jesus encounters her, the moment is quiet but powerful. He speaks to her calmly and calls her by name,
Mary of Magdala.
revealing that he knows her completely. In that moment, Mary is freed from the darkness that has controlled her life. She is restored, not only spiritually, but emotionally and socially. Mary becomes one of the first people to follow Jesus, staying close to him as his journey begins. At the same time, the series introduces Simon Peter and his brother Andrew, fishermen struggling under crushing debt. Simon is angry, impulsive, and desperate to keep his family afloat while avoiding Roman punishment. Andrew, more hopeful and open, has already met Jesus and believes he may be the Messiah. Simon, however, is skeptical and unwilling to trust easily. His life feels out of control, and faith seems like a risk he cannot afford. Jesus meets Simon during one of his lowest moments. After guiding Simon to cast his nets again, Jesus enables him to catch an overwhelming number of fish, far more than Simon could ever expect. Instead of celebrating, Simon is shaken. He realizes he is standing before someone far greater than himself. Overcome with fear and guilt, Simon falls to his knees. Jesus responds not with judgment, but with an invitation to follow him.
Follow me.
Simon agrees, leaving behind his old life to walk an uncertain path. Other future disciples are introduced gradually. Matthew, a tax collector working for the Romans, lives apart from his own people. Though wealthy, he is isolated and disliked, spending his days recording numbers and observing the world from a distance. Matthew notices patterns in Jesus' actions and becomes quietly intrigued. Even as others despise him, his interest in Jesus grows. Though he has not yet been called, Nicodemus, a respected Pharisee and teacher of the law, witnesses Jesus performing miracles, including the healing of a woman who has suffered for years. These events disturb Nicodemus deeply. He believes in God and the law, yet what he sees challenges everything he understands. Torn between truth and reputation, Nicodemus begins questioning whether God is working in ways he does not expect. As Jesus moves through towns and villages, he performs several miracles that begin spreading his reputation. One of the most notable is the healing of a paralyzed man whose friends lower him through a roof to reach Jesus. Jesus not only heals the man physically, but also forgives his sins, stunning those who witness it. Word of Jesus begins to travel quickly, drawing curiosity, hope, and concern. Jesus also calls James and John, brothers who leave their fishing business behind to follow him. The small group of followers begins to form, though they are uncertain, flawed, and often confused. They do not yet understand who Jesus truly is or what he plans to do, but they choose to walk with him anyway. By the end of season 1, Jesus has not yet confronted authorities openly or gathered massive crowds. Instead, he has built a foundation, calling individuals one by one, restoring broken lives, and forming a small group of followers willing to leave everything behind. The journey has begun, and though the destination is unclear, the path forward is set. Season 2, The ministry takes shape. Season 2 follows Jesus and his growing group of disciples as they begin traveling together more openly. The small group is still learning how to live with one another, adjusting to constant movement, shared resources, and the reality of following a teacher whose path is unpredictable. Differences in background, personality, and belief create moments of tension, but the group continues forward together. Early in the season, Jesus attends a wedding in Cana with his disciples and his mother, Mary. When the wine runs out, the hosts face embarrassment and shame. At Mary's request, Jesus quietly intervenes and turns water into wine. The miracle is not announced publicly, but those closest to him witness it. This event confirms to the disciples that Jesus' power goes beyond healing and teaching, even as he continues to avoid drawing attention to himself. As they travel from town to town, Jesus performs more healings. People suffering from long-term illnesses, physical disabilities, and spiritual oppression come to him seeking help. Crowds begin to form wherever he goes. One of the most memorable moments occurs when a paralyzed man is lowered through the roof of a house by his friends. Jesus forgives the man's sins and heals him, causing amazement among the people and alarm among the religious leaders who witness it. During this time, Matthew is directly called to follow Jesus while working as a tax collector. Jesus invites him without hesitation, shocking both the crowd and the disciples.
Matthew, son of Alphaeus, follow me.
Matthew leaves his position immediately, abandoning his former life. His presence creates friction within the group, especially with Simon Peter, who struggles to trust someone who once worked for the Romans. Despite this tension, Jesus insists that Matthew belongs with them. Jesus spends more time teaching his disciples privately. He explains parables, prepares them for rejection, and encourages them to rely on faith rather than certainty. Though they listen closely, the disciples often misunderstand his words. They struggle to grasp the idea of a kingdom that does not rely on power or force. As Jesus' influence grows, religious leaders become increasingly concerned. Pharisees observe his actions closely, questioning his authority and criticizing him for associating with sinners. Conflict intensifies when Jesus heals on the Sabbath, openly challenging traditional interpretations of the law. Some leaders attempt to trap him with questions, while others quietly debate how dangerous his influence may become. At one point, Jesus sends the disciples out in pairs to preach and heal on their own. This is the first time they act without him physically present. Each pair faces fear, rejection, and uncertainty. Some are welcomed, while others are turned away. When they return, they share stories of both success and failure. The experience strengthens their faith, but also reveals how much they still depend on Jesus. Throughout the season, relationships among the disciples continue to evolve. Simon Peter wrestles with leadership and responsibility. Mary Magdalene remains close to Jesus, offering support and loyalty. Matthew works to gain acceptance within the group, using his skills to help organize their resources. Though disagreements persist, the disciples slowly begin to function as a united group. By the end of season 2, Jesus' name has spread far beyond the places he has visited. Crowds grow larger, miracles become more widely known, and opposition from religious authorities becomes more visible. The disciples are more committed than before, yet they remain unsure of where this journey is leading. What began as a small, quiet following is now becoming a movement, and the cost of following Jesus is becoming clearer with each step. Seasons 3 and 4. Growing crowds and rising tension. Seasons 3 and 4 follow Jesus as his ministry expands rapidly and reaches far beyond small villages. Large crowds now gather wherever he travels. People come seeking healing, teaching, and hope, often overwhelming the disciples, who struggle to manage the growing numbers and constant demands placed on Jesus. Jesus begins teaching more openly and frequently to large crowds. One of the most important moments during this time is the Sermon on the Mount. Surrounded by followers and curious onlookers, Jesus speaks about humility, mercy, forgiveness, love for enemies, and trusting God. His teachings challenge common beliefs and overturn expectations about power, wealth, and righteousness. Many in the crowd are moved by his words, while others are confused or unsettled. As Jesus' teachings spread, so do reports of his miracles. He heals people suffering from blindness, paralysis, and long-term illness. He casts out demons and restores those who have been isolated from society. In one dramatic moment, Jesus calms a violent storm while traveling by boat with his disciples. leaving them fearful and amazed. In another, he feeds a massive crowd with only a small amount of food, providing enough for everyone and leaving leftovers behind. These events deepen the disciples' belief, even as they struggle to fully understand who Jesus is. With the growing crowds comes increasing opposition. Religious leaders actively follow Jesus, questioning his authority and accusing him of breaking the law. They are angered when he heals on the Sabbath and forgives sins publicly. Their confrontations with Jesus become more frequent and hostile, drawing clear lines between him and the established religious system. Within the group of disciples, internal struggles continue. Simon Peter takes on more responsibility but wrestles with doubt and fear. Thomas questions openly and seeks clarity. Matthew continues working to earn the trust of the others, using his organizational skills to support the group. Mary Magdalene remains close to Jesus but becomes increasingly aware of the dangers surrounding him. James and John struggle with ambition and misunderstandings about leadership. Judas Iscariot becomes more prominent during this period. He manages the group's finances and believes strongly in Jesus' mission. However, Judas also grows increasingly focused on expectations of political change and visible success. As Jesus continues to avoid direct confrontation with Roman authority, Judas becomes frustrated, convinced that Jesus should act more decisively. Jesus begins speaking more frequently to his disciples about suffering, rejection, and future hardship. He warns them that following him will come at a cost and that difficult times are ahead. Although the disciples hear these words, they do not fully grasp their meaning. Many still hope Jesus will rise as a powerful leader who will bring immediate change. Season 4 brings the story closer to open conflict. Jesus' reputation now reaches religious and political leaders alike. Some people follow him faithfully, others turn away, and some plot against him. The disciples sense that the situation is becoming dangerous, though they remain committed to staying with Jesus. By the end of Season 4, Jesus is no longer seen as just a teacher or healer. He has become a figure of controversy, drawing loyalty and hostility in equal measure. The crowds are larger than ever. The disciples are deeply invested, and the opposition is organized and determined. The story moves steadily toward confrontation, and the sense that events are reaching a critical point becomes impossible to ignore. Season 5, the final journey to Jerusalem. Season 5 follows Jesus as his ministry enters its final phase, and the story moves steadily toward Jerusalem. By this point, his name is widely known. Crowds gather wherever he appears, and both supporters and enemies follow his movements closely. The disciples sense that something significant is approaching, even though they do not fully understand what lies ahead. As Jesus travels toward Jerusalem, he continues teaching publicly and privately. His words grow more direct, often delivered through parables that expose hypocrisy, pride, and false righteousness. Many people are drawn to his teachings, while others become increasingly uncomfortable with the authority he speaks with. Religious leaders openly challenge him, attempting to trap him with questions and undermine his influence. Jesus responds calmly, often turning their questions back on them, leaving the crowds astonished. When Jesus enters Jerusalem, he is welcomed by large crowds who praise him and treat him as a king. People spread cloaks and branches along the road, celebrating his arrival and expressing hope that he will bring change and deliverance. The disciples are caught up in the excitement, believing that this moment may mark a turning point. Religious authorities, however, see the public reaction as a serious threat and begin actively planning how to stop him. One of the most defining events of the season takes place when Jesus enters the temple, seeing merchants and money changers exploiting worshipers. He drives them out, overturning tables and condemning the corruption taking place there. His actions shock everyone present and provoke anger among the religious leaders. From this moment on, opposition to Jesus becomes urgent and organized. Jesus continues teaching in Jerusalem, often addressing large crowds in the temple courts. He speaks about faith, humility, judgment, and the coming kingdom of God. His parables grow sharper, clearly directed at those in power. Religious leaders attempt to discredit him, but their efforts repeatedly fail in public, further increasing their resentment. Privately, Jesus speaks with his disciples about what is coming. He warns them of betrayal, suffering, and separation. Although he speaks clearly, the disciples struggle to accept his words. They argue among themselves about leadership and remain hopeful that Jesus will still reveal his power in a way they expect. During this time, Judas Iscariot becomes increasingly conflicted. Disappointed by Jesus' refusal to act against Roman authority and frustrated by the growing danger, Judas secretly meets with religious leaders. He agrees to betray Jesus in exchange for money, believing that his actions may force events forward. As Passover approaches, Jesus gathers his disciples for a final meal. During the supper, he speaks about his body and blood, offering bread and wine as symbols of a new covenant. He tells the disciples that one of them will betray him and that all of them will be tested. The disciples react with confusion and fear, each questioning their own loyalty, despite their promises to stand by him. Tension fills the room. After the meal, Jesus leads the disciples to the Garden of Gethsemane. There, he withdraws to pray while asking his closest followers to stay awake, as he prays in deep distress. The disciples struggle to remain alert and fall asleep. Later that night, Judas arrives with soldiers and religious officials. He identifies Jesus with a kiss, and Jesus is arrested without resistance. The disciples panic and scatter. Jesus is taken away in chains, marking the end of his public ministry. Season 5 closes with uncertainty, fear, and heartbreak, as the followers of Jesus are left facing events they never believed would happen so quickly. Season 6, trial, crucifixion, and the silence that follows. Season 6 begins immediately after Jesus' arrest. He is taken away under guard while his disciples flee in fear. Scattered throughout the night, Jesus is brought before the Jewish religious leaders, where he is questioned and accused. Witnesses are called, but their testimonies conflict. Despite the lack of clear evidence, the leaders are determined to condemn him. Jesus remains calm and largely silent, responding only when directly questioned about his identity. As dawn approaches, Jesus is taken to the Roman authorities. Pontius Pilate questions him, trying to determine whether he poses a political threat. Pilate finds no clear reason to sentence him to death, but the pressure from religious leaders and the growing crowd increases. Pilate attempts to avoid responsibility by sending Jesus to Herod, who mocks him and sends him back without judgment. Jesus is returned to Pilate. The crowd grows louder, demanding punishment. Though Pilate repeatedly states that he finds no guilt in Jesus, he eventually gives in to the pressure. Jesus is scourged, mocked by soldiers, dressed in a crown of thorns, and treated with cruelty. The soldiers ridicule him as a king, striking him and laughing as he endures the abuse without resistance. Meanwhile, Peter watches from a distance. When confronted by several people who recognize him as one of Jesus' followers, Peter denies knowing him 3 times, just as Jesus had predicted. Realizing what he has done, Peter is overwhelmed with guilt and sorrow. Judas Iscariot, seeing that Jesus has been condemned, is consumed by regret. He attempts to return the money he received for the betrayal, but the religious leaders refuse to take responsibility. Judas is left alone with his despair, realizing the irreversible consequences of his actions. Jesus is led through the streets toward Golgotha, carrying the cross. Weakened by torture and blood loss, he stumbles under its weight. A man named Simon of Cyrene is forced to help carry the cross the rest of the way. Along the road, women mourn openly, while soldiers push the procession forward. At Golgotha, Jesus is nailed to the cross between 2 criminals. As he hangs there, he speaks words of forgiveness, asking God to forgive those who are responsible for his suffering. He comforts one of the criminals beside him and entrusts his mother, Mary, to the care of his disciple John. Darkness falls over the land, and the atmosphere grows heavy and still. After hours of suffering, Jesus cries out and takes his final breath. The earth trembles, and those witnessing the event are shaken by what they have seen. A Roman centurion acknowledges that Jesus was truly innocent. His body is taken down from the cross and wrapped for burial. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus place Jesus' body in a tomb. A large stone is rolled across the entrance, and guards are posted. Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of Jesus, and other women watch in silence, their hope replaced by grief and confusion. The disciples remain hidden, afraid and broken. Everything they believed was coming to pass seems lost. Season 6 ends not with answers, but with stillness. Jesus lies in the tomb, his followers are scattered, and the story pauses in silence, waiting for what is yet to come. Reaching the end of Season 6, it's difficult not to pause and reflect. The Chosen does more than retell familiar gospel events. It slows them down, places us inside them, and asks us to feel their weight. watching the journey from the first quiet calling of broken individuals to the silence of the tomb. I'm reminded that this story was never meant to be rushed or simplified. What stands out most to me is how human everyone feels. The disciples are not heroes. They are confused, afraid, hopeful, and often wrong. Jesus, meanwhile, remains steady, compassionate, intentional, and unwavering, even when misunderstood or abandoned. That contrast is powerful, and it raises an important question. If we were there, how would we have responded? Would we have followed closely, or from a distance? Would we have understood or doubted? Season 6 ends in silence, but that silence feels intentional. It gives us space to grieve, to question, and to remember that faith often passes through darkness before light appears. So I want to ask you, which moment from seasons 1 through 6 impacted you the most? Which character's journey felt closest to your own? And as the story moves forward, what are you hoping to see next? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.